Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are on Suhua Lake playing as the Dawi against the force of the Beastmen. And in my opinion this is probably one of the worst, if not the worst maps in the game. It's a really badly designed map, and the reason why is because one side, the player on my side, has this high ground, which might seem like an advantage. The problem is that if you're stuck with an artillery or flat arc heavy faction, you can't really deploy in a position to get fire off very effectively. You kind of have to push cannons up to this point essentially to get any sort of effective fire, and that is incredibly bad in my opinion for gameplay, especially if you need to get some early shots. But really with the Dawi you do need some cannon play, because otherwise if your opponent brings a sideward you're screwed. So here we are kind of forced to deploy here, and otherwise the build you can see deployed very awkwardly, and that's basically, once again, just because of the way this map is laid out, and I think it's a terrible map. But without further ado, let's kind of dive right in and discuss this build. So I didn't want to make a more melee-centric composition, and obviously, like I said, you need the cannons to deal with Cygors, but besides that, you really don't need that much shooting presence. And I think, you know, we can make this work in melee, especially if we use crowd control with Runes of Wrath and Ruin. So going over the build here for my Lord, Rune Lord, on a toilet seat. So with the Anvil of Doom, he does have some pretty solid stats. Master Rune Negation, of course, Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, mostly for the crowd control, but also for straight damage. And then the Locus of Power, which is amazing. Plus 15% magic resistance map wide, means that if my opponent tries to hit me with Devolve, with Fate of Buna, if he's bringing Flocks of Doom, whatever spells he might be bringing, I'm going to be at least somewhat resistant to it. Hell, if he brings the Regiment of Renowned Cygor, we do have some decent counter play. Outside of that, we do have two stripped down runesmiths. These guys only have the Hammer of Characterized as well as a Rune of Wrath and Ruin. This makes them pretty potent. Obviously, they're not the most amazing characters in melee, but with 120 armor, their dwarvish stalwartness will, of course, see them through quite a lot. And the Hammer of Characterized does allow them to debuff enemies that would otherwise be a huge threat to the Hammerers, especially. But honestly, it'll help units like Miners and whatnot hold as well if needed. Now for our main line, we do have 3 units of Dwarf Warriors here for the front line, or what should be the front line, alongside the Iron Breakers. Now obviously, because this deployment zone kind of cuts off about here, the Dwarves were forced to deploy somewhere further back. We did Vanguard our Nork Lemmings as well as our single unit Miners up to the front as a bit of a zoning tool, but the main front line should be these Dwarf Warriors. In support, we do have 2 units of Hammers. These guys will hopefully be hiding behind the Dwarves and then getting their full charges off, and then crumping some filthy Beastmen troops, especially Bestigors, with their 95 armor, should be cracked open very, very effectively by these hammers. Finally, in the very back, we do have 2 units of Slayers, one of which is the Dragonback Slayers, who have the cool Power of the Dragonback, which is a nifty ability. Minus 36% speed to enemies allows me to crowd control them much better, especially when it's stacked on Rune of Wrath and Ruin. It's going to make these guys absolute beasts. The Normal Design Breakers, I did figure, obviously a bit of a risk because they are a very expensive unit, and this does mean that my line is not as wide as I would like. But I figured, you know what, let's give them a shot. Let's see if we can make it work. And with their blasting charges, they should be able to clear away trash pretty efficiently. Now for my opponent, he did decide to go with an interesting take on the matchup. For his Lord, he has brought Malagor the Dark Omen, which honestly is not that interesting of a choice. You will see him fairly often. Obviously, Dwarves cannot snipe him very efficiently. He's got access to some great spells. It looks like my opponent actually brought all of his spells, something I am very keen on not recommending. Don't do that, guys. Don't bring all your spells. He does have Arcane Conduit as well, which will be nice. It means he can drop. He's got quite a selection of abilities, and it does mean that if, for example, if he just wants to spam his Bestial Surge, he can do so. Now for the rest of this build, my opponent does have a front line composed of Ungor Herd. You can see they're hidden here, 4 units of them. These guys, of course, could potentially flank. They could tie down Slayers. They could get on top of artillery crews, all while the main line is doing the fighting. 2 units of Bestigors are providing some extra oomph. A single Gorbel is over here, equipped pretty well. He's got Foe Seekers, Deadly Onslaught, and Slaughterer's Call, which is a great AoE melee attack buff, and charge bonus buff, and leadership buff, I think. And then he does have 2 Minotaurs with shields, one which is the Butcher's Falcon Guard. Finally, we do have the Ungor Spearmen with shields over there, an extra unit, sort of just as fodder, I suppose. Centaurs throwing axes over here, most likely against gyrocopters, and then the Sons of Goros on this flank. And this is a unit, once again, I can't really recommend. The magic damage, because it is, well, it's magic damage, it's going to be reduced by 40% against all of my troops. So despite being AP, these guys are really not going to hold up against Dwarves. And this is a unit I really just wouldn't recommend. But we will see how they perform in this matchup. In the meantime, you can't see my cannons are going to be trying to pop some shots on my opponent, trying to hit Malagor, and kind of failing. They do clip this Ungor Herd, which I don't believe I'd spotted at this point. You can see the first spots are coming in now as the Normal Gremlins, Iron Breakers, and Miners push forward. And I'm sort of trying to get my Dwarf Warriors up into position and flexing a few of them, or the Slayers over to the side there. Just trying to get set up so that I can intercept my opponent no matter where he comes from. Now, realizing that I'm not going to be able to get very good shots at most of the stuff downhill, we are getting the long shots down this way with the cannons, where their arc is just barely acceptable, and starting to chip away at these butchers. But do keep in mind the butchers do have the benefit of regeneration, so unless we kill models, they are going to be able to come back, at least until we've done a lot of damage. Over here, though, the poor Ungors get completely decimated as they try to charge into the face of these blasting charges, and her cinder bombs, I do believe, is what they're supposed to be, and they just get completely destroyed and are now going to buckle almost immediately. So the Ironbreakers basically take no damage, laugh them off, and chase them off. And in the meantime, the Butcher of the Falcon Guard falling apart under sustained artillery fire, losing 3 models in the space of just a few seconds, and reduced to a mere husk of their former selves. And diving in against the Northern Ironbreakers, sure, they're not going to do badly, but they are now stuck in a trash fight. You can see the Satchel Charges diving in on the Bestigors. And now as the main push starts to connect, we can see over here these guys hit by Mantle of Gorok, trying to make them a little more better, or a lot better against the Ironbreakers. But unfortunately over here, the Bestigors hit by a Hammer of Characterized and just decimated by the Hammers. Over on this flank, though, things going a little less peachy keen. The Warble did dive in, and although Hammers will do some okay damage against him, he does have 100 armor against the Dwarf Warriors and Slayers if I manage to get them in. And the Hammers are now exposed to the Centaurs with throwing axes, which is really not what I want happening. You can see I'm throwing in the Runesmith right now, repositioning these Dwarf Warriors, looking to absorb this push and tie my opponent down while the cannons continue firing away. Now they have kind of shifted fire and focusing on Malagor, trying to chip him down because the Gorbles are now in the main fight. But you can see the brave Rune Lord coming in for the hold to swing at these filthy butchers, and they are now down to 5 models, so definitely not where they want to be in life, and getting chipped down pretty handily. So this is really what you want to be doing, removing these big high-value targets from play. They're now down to 4 models, so even with regen, they're not going to get much more value. And with Satchel Charges, the blasting charges on these guys, and the sheer power of the Hammers, we're able to just dice through these troops. Look at these Hammers, up to 169 kills. They've slaughtered Ungor Spears, they've slaughtered the Bestigor Herd, and a single unit of Ungors. Basically single-handed, so that's pretty nuts. Elsewhere, the Sons of Gorr is hit by Rune of Wrath and Ruin, as well as the power of the Dragon Pack, down to 14 speed, which makes zombies look like Usain Bolt. And they're being cut down in droves by the Dragon Pack Slayers, who are just so good against these guys. And of course, with that 40% magic resist, the poor Centaurs have no chance. Just look at these guys. They've got 44 melee defense. The Sons of Gorr are really screwed here, and they're in full retreat almost immediately, completely dumpstered, and really a rough situation for my opponent here, losing this very valuable cavalry unit. This is a 1200 gold unit. Do keep that in mind, guys. Over on this flank, the Slayers did get in on the Minotaurs initially, but then my opponent managed to pull through, get on top of more easy targets like these Dwarf Warriors and Miners. Definitely a good play there, and using his Ungors to bog down my Slayers. So definitely well played there. Definitely is a smart move to make. But in the meantime, the Northern Ironbreakers do flank and drop a barrage on these Bestigors, and we have it at them with the Master of Wrath and Ruin as well, holding them down very efficiently. In the meantime, the cannons continue pounding away, sniping down Malagor a good bit, as the very healthy unit of Hammers and Dwarf Warriors pursues him, putting a decent dent. Unfortunately, though, now my opponent finally gets in on my guns, diving in on these 2 cannons, and this is really going to be game for them. They're not really going to be able to survive. The Orbital is in there, the Minotaurs are in there. We hit them with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin to prevent an escape. This does mean the Dragon Max Slayers get in. They're now down to 16 mobility, which is really not where they want to be in life. They're basically completely crippled. You can see the Dragon Max Slayers just running amok. Going to be able to shut these guys down almost completely. And yeah, sucks to be these Minotaurs. But in the meantime, the Gorble also getting chipped down, and you can see my opponent at this point really in a rough spot. The Butchers of Falcon Guard down to 2 models, 142 HP. The Sons of Gorr is diving in. Certainly my opponent will be able to do a good chunk of damage potentially, but really at this point it's just too little too late. This damage needed to be done earlier. The Minotaurs with shields getting torn down by the Hammers, who've taken quite a beating because of the throwing axes, but at this stage, balance of power shifting decisively in my favor over here. The Slayers, who are struggling against the Ungors, do finally see a win, and close victory for the Dawi. So I think this match, my opponent did not necessarily the most competitive builds. If I had to make a recommendation, I don't personally think bringing too many Minotaurs is that smart. I think you're better off spamming a lot of Bestigors, bringing a bit of cavalry, though honestly preferably chariots. I think personally one of the things I really do enjoy doing is bring Morgar, because Morgar is tanky, he's hard to snipe down with cannons and guns and that sort of stuff, and he can bring you summons of the Chaos Spawn to harass the backline. And then bring 2 Shamans. You don't even have to kit him out very well, you don't have to give him a lot of equipment, but put him on chariots and just run amok in the backline, and you're going to get so much value, guys. Like this Gorble, we saw how well kitted out it was, but if I go to, and I see what Steady Eddie there was going for, he was trying to get sort of some higher mass, higher damage output AP units. But if we compare real quick in customs, if this even loads up, So let's compare, say, a Brave Shaman of Beasts, thrown on a chair, or you could try. You know what, you could. I'd say what I'd probably bring him is Brave Shaman of Shadows. So let's say I bring a Brave Shaman of Shadows. I'm not going to bother with Smoke and Mirrors, probably. And Fleet Blinking Foe, no Melkoth's Miasma, no Penumbral Pendulum. We'd probably bring the Withering as debuff, Pit of Shade, something like that. If I brought 2 casters, I probably wouldn't even bother with the Withering. Bring a Jagged Dagger. There you go. Fully kitted out Shaman. He's got 3,400 HP. He's got 80 armor on his chariot. Now, his stats are trash, but it doesn't matter because you're not doing sustained combat with him. You're just running amok in a chariot. And he's going to do a lot of work. In comparison to the Gorbel, which is what my opponent brought, with his baseline kit, my opponent didn't actually bring any of his items, 1,500. So he's paying 500 more gold. Over 500 more gold. For a unit that's going to do a lot less for you. Gorbel just doesn't have the mobility. He doesn't really have the mass. He doesn't really have the killing power against infantry. 36 and 32. And he's not that good at cycle charging. Is really not great. And he doesn't get that bonus for large against Zowie. Unless you're, say, hunting down a Rune Lord actively. But I really don't think that's worth it. I think you're much better off with the Brave Shaman. It just gives you so much more utility. And so I think compared to what my opponent did there, now granted, my opponent didn't make a mistake of bringing a full spell loadout on Malagor, which I think you don't want to be doing. What you could realistically do is bring like Morgur, kit it out. It's like so, Gorbel. Then you don't necessarily want the same spells, spell loadout. So you could do something like this, and then bring a Brave Shaman of Beasts. If you wanted to, also throw him on a chariot. You could bring like an Amber Spear, try to be a little gimmicky, maybe with some wild form. Do something like that. Bring the Wild Heart, might as well. And here you've got a decent sort of command core. And this core, with the chariots, you can run amok in your opponent's backline. Honestly, it's much easier to dodge projectiles or hide them and avoid getting tied down than it is with a unit of Minotaurs or Centaurs and units like that. And you're just going to get a lot of value with them as long as you're on top of your micro. And as long as you don't pile them into like a unit of Iron Drakes, like into the face of a unit of Iron Drakes, they will do great. And this would really be my suggestion. Just double up Brave Shaman of Shadows with a Morgur the Shadow gave. And this is really the command squad I'd recommend. And then bring a bunch of Vestigors for your front line. You don't even have to go full on with Vestigors. You can bring like 5 units of them. If you're trying to beat the tournament legal, I think 5 is the limit. Bring a few Harpies to run Interdiction. That was another problem for my opponent there. He just wasn't able to get that width to surround me and shut down my flanks. You know, maybe you can't afford that many Harpies. So let's say you bring like Blackhorn Ravagers and throw in a few Ungor Herd on the flanks. Ta-da! There you go. A build I'd recommend with Beastmen. And with this, you've got some decent backline shutdown. You've got some decent counters against Slayers. You go very wide with your Ungors. Your Vestigors will trade pretty well into most infantry that your opponent will bring. If you really have issues, if your opponent, say, brings Iron Breakers, units like that, that's where the Brave Shamans come in. They run them over with repeated cycle charging. And yeah, that's kind of how it works out. And I think it works really nicely. So that's my 2 cents. Otherwise, for my opponent's build, I don't really have too many critiques. I do see what he was going for. He was trying to do a sort of more balanced infantry and monster-centric build rather than going very heavy on infantry with hero play. But I just don't think it's that effective. As for my build, I'm not necessarily the most effective just because normally means Iron Breakers, while they obviously kicked rear in that game, they just don't really have the field presence to dominate, in my opinion. And I think the Hammerers, while one of them performed incredibly well, they're once again just very juicy targets for, say, Cygor play. They don't have the field presence. For the investments I made in that game into my Dwarf line, I could have easily, like, that was 3,700 gold, I think, for the unit, for the army, for the just those 3 relatively elite units. Because yeah, it was double hammers and the Iron Breakers, so 3,700 gold right there. And realistically, for 3,700 gold, you'd be far better off like bringing a bunch of Longbeards with great weapons, honestly. You just bring like 4 units of them and then double up like Miners with Blasting Charges, and that's basically the same cost, and it gives you double the field presence. So probably the better way to go here. But regardless, I wanted to give it a shot. So we tried something a little more elite, and it did kind of pay off. The hammers did kind of work out. But regardless, I do know this was a bit of a tedious post-battle breakdown, but I did want to give some tips and tricks if you're playing as Beastmen and what not to do. And I think it's a matchup I've had a lot of success with as Beastmen. I've found it pretty straightforward matchup, but I do see a lot of players, in my opinion, playing it wrong. So I figured to pitch in some thoughts. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you found it entertaining and hopefully a bit informative, perhaps gives you some ideas on what to do It's either side in the matchup. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, as usual, any requests, don't hesitate to post them down below, and I will do my very best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.